Hello everybody, my name is Walter and this is episode 27 of my Redstone Commands Series. In this episode I want to cover how you can use commands to manipulate the attributes of players and mobs. Now if you want to either just know the current value of an attribute of an entity, or you want to directly change that attribute, either the base value or through modifiers, you can use the attribute command. This could be, for example, be used on an adventure map around Qianxia or cultivation, where you train and become stronger over time, and if you do certain things, get trained by certain people. And yeah, just a few ideas to throw out there. Some modifiers to attributes are also automatically applied by the game. So for example, if you have a tool in your hand, you get an increase to your damage output. Or if a zombie is created, it has a certain probability of summoning another zombie. And all of that is handled through attributes that are automatically handled by the game. So with that said, let's go on a bit of a side trip. What are UUIDs, or universally unique identifiers, in Minecraft? To put it simple, they are a way for the game to distinguish between separate instances. So for example, two entities that are completely identical in every form, the game will still be able to separate through their unique identifiers. You have already seen those a few times in my videos. So if we use the autocomplete function with the get command, for example, you can see very quickly we get this string of characters and digits and some hyphens in there. And that's basically the in-game name for that entity. We will need those hyphenated UUIDs when we want to generate modifiers for attributes. So this is why I'm going into the details here. Basically, for Minecraft, those four numbers here are random numbers. So you can, when you're generating one, basically put any kind of number in there. They are hexadecimal numbers. So you have the digits from 0 to 9 and then the letters or characters from A to F. A would be a 10, F would be worth a 15 basically. The first number is 8 digits, then you have 3 with 4 digits, and then you have a final one with 12 digits. As I said, the values are pretty much random, and if you have leading zeros, you can leave them out, since through those hyphens, the game already knows where one starts and the other ends. Int array, somewhat similar. You may find this if you're attaching modifiers to items. I will show you a few examples at the very end. Those are basically 4 32-bit numbers, signed integer, so they can be positive or negative, and they follow the normal syntax. So you have the rectangular brackets, then E to tell it it's an int array, and then you have just separated by commas the 4 numbers. Again, those, when you want to generate something with UUID, you can use more or less random numbers here. So for example, 0, 0, 0, and 1, 0, 0, 0, and 2, and so on. Just make sure that you don't double up within your data pack, or you may get some error messages. Anyway, let's continue with what attributes are actually. So they are, to put it simple, buffs or debuffs that apply to players, mobs, and armor stands, either directly using the attribute command, or during generation, or indirectly via equipped items. Some of them are, for example, the maximum health, which is an attribute you can directly change. You have the attack damage, you have the jump strength of horses, you have the probability of summoning another zombie, and so on and so on. There's a whole list in the wiki, link for that is in the description. Now with that out of the way, let's actually talk about the syntax of the command attribute. There are two main use cases. The first is interacting with the base value, and the second is adding modifiers or working with modifiers, which basically add or multiply the base value. For this part here, we start with the name of the command, then we specify the target. This target must be a single player, mob, or armor stand. So you can use player names, you can use UIDs, or you can use target selectors. If you're using the all player or the all entity target selector, we will have to limit it to 1, similar to, for example, the data command. After that, you define which attribute you want to work with. This can be, as an example, generic armor or attack damage or whatever. After that, you can do two things. You can either get the current value or you can change the base value. For getting a value, you have two options. You can get the total value or you can get the base value. The base value is before all modifiers are applied, and the total value is after those modifiers are applied. So base value would be basically you without any equipment, and the total value would be with all the equipment you currently wearing, as an example. So to get the base value, you write base get. To get the total value, just write get. Optionally, you can add a scaling factor. For example, if you want the number of hearts, since each heart is 2 health worth, you will just scale with 0.5 and then you get the number of hearts. If you want to change the base value, you just write base set and then the value you want to give it. And that's already it. A bit more complex are modifiers. We start similar, attribute, then the target, and then the actual name of the attribute, then the word modifier. And then we can do three things. We can either add a new modifier, we can remove an existing one, or we can get the value of an existing one. Let's start with adding a new one. We start with the word add. Then you have to give the game a UUID and a name for that new modifier. The UUID is a hyphenated one, which, remember, 5 digits, hyphens in between, hexadecimal, and can be randomized, or can be, for example, 0001. The name is just either a single word or a string in double quotation marks, which may contain upper and lowercase characters and digits and plus, minus, point, and underscore. So you're a bit limited, but this is not really used in any command as far as I know. After that, you define the value of that modifier, and then you define the type of that modifier. There are 3 different types. You can have an add, you can have a multiply base, or you can have a multiplier. If you have multiple different modifiers, first the add, then the multiply base, and then finally the multiply modifiers are applied. So there is a defined order. Let's start with the add. Those are basically just added, or the value is just added to the current attribute or to the base value. If the attribute modifier is attached to an item, which then applies it to the user when it's equipped, you will find it in the NPT data as operation 0. Operation 1, or multiply base, is applied after the add multipliers, and here first all multiply base values are summed up, then 1 is added, and then that's multiplied onto the current base value. So the actual base value plus the added ones, and thus is multiplied with 1 plus the total value. And somewhat similar, we have operation 2, or multiply base. Those are not first summed up, those are just one after the other multiplied onto the base value, or 1 plus the value. So if you have 2 multipliers, first 1 is multiplied and then the second is multiplied. If you have multiply base ones, first both are summed up and then multiplied. There is a bit of a difference in the actual mechanics there. So that's adding a modifier. Removing one is very simple, just remove, and then the name of, or the unique identifier of that one. And if you want the value, write value get, then the UUID, and again you can optionally add a scaling factor. And with that said, let's actually talk or give you a few examples, just a few minor ones. So first, let's figure out how big my current total speed is. So you can see I'm not questioning the base value, just the total value for movement speed. And you can see it's around 0.1, which is the normal movement speed of a player. Now let's add a modifier onto that. So here I'm modifying movement speed. I'm adding a new modifier. The mode for that modifier is multiply base. The value is 10. And you can see UUID is just 0001, and the name I gave it was Sonic. So yeah. And if I do this, you can see field of view changes. And if I now walk here, you can see I'm 11 times as fast, which you can also figure out if we do our question again. You can see it's basically the value from before times 11. So 1 plus 10. And now let's remove this again, and you can see field of view is back. And if I question, I'm back to the 0.1. So this is application directly to an entity. Now let's talk about applying modifiers via equipment. You have already seen this somewhat, or you know already this, since when you look here, when in main hand, 5 attack damage, 1.6 attack speed. Those are modifiers already in the vanilla game that are applied once you have this in your main hand. But you can define your own modifiers. So for example, here, I'm giving myself, so you can see this doesn't work anymore with the attribute. Here you have to use other commands like the give or the item command or summon command to actually create the entity directly with that attribute modifier. So here I'm giving myself a netherite sword, and in the NBT data we have an attribute modifier with the attribute attack damage. The amount is 10, so that's the value basically. Operation 0, which means that we are adding, and then just a random UUID. Here you can see it's an int array in this case, and then just a single item. And now, if we look in the inventory, you can see this netherite sword will add 10 to the attack damage when I have it either in my main hand, in my offhand, be it as footwear on my legs, body, or head, which is a bit of a strange choice, but basically this means that I could double up with another sword if I have this in my offhand also. I can also further specify a slot. So here I'm using netherite boots. Pretty much the same idea as before, attribute modifiers. This time I'm defining slot feet, and then movement speeds, amount 10, operation 1, so multiply base. But the interesting part here is slot feet. If I do this now, you can see, instead of having mentioned every single slot, I have defined, okay, I only want this modifier applied when it's on my feet. And you can see a 1000% modifier, so multiply 10 or 11. And if I do this, and you can see the moment I equipped it, field of view changes again, and I'm back to super speed. And if I remove it again, it's removed again. So just a few ideas of what you can do with that. And well, with that, we have reached the end of this episode about attributes. I hope you enjoyed it, and well, see ya.